Hey there, and welcome back to the Beginner's Garden Podcast. I hope you're gearing up for this garden season just like I am. And today we're going to be talking about some garden planning tasks that you can put on your calendar right now, no matter where you are in your garden season. You may still have snow on the ground and you're itching to get your garden planted. But when we think about planning our gardens, the main thing that we plan, besides what to plant, is when to plant. Now, that's a big part, and I actually spend a lot of time helping you dial that in my garden planning course, Dream to Garden, which, by the way, is open right now through February 13th for the season. So if you're interested in that, check that out. We'll have the link in the description, or you can go to journeywithjill.net/dream-to-garden. So I do spend a lot of time helping you dial in when you plant because that is super important. But there are other garden tasks that sometimes fall through the cracks because you're so focused on what to plant and when to plant. And what happens is that those tasks can sneak up on you, and then you wake up one day and you think, uh-oh, gotta get this done right now. But it doesn't have to be that way. By planning other garden tasks at the right time and doing them also at a time other than when you're planting, that's a key to reduce overwhelm. This will ease a lot of that gotta get it done stress and help you have a more enjoyable season. That's something that I'm leaning into more and more, is just not so much focusing on all the what and get it done and hurry up and franticness that can come from planting and planning and growing the garden. I'm trying to actually enjoy it a little bit more. Getting these tasks on the calendar ahead of time really help you to enjoy your garden without feeling like you're a slave to it. So grab a pencil or the Notes app on your phone and jot down these 12 tasks that you can get on your calendar now. Trust me, if you would get them put on your calendar, your future self will thank you. If any of this sounds familiar, you probably joined me this week for the Productive Garden Masterclass. It's a masterclass on how to start planning your garden that I do every February. And if you missed it, you can still catch the replay. We will put a link in the description, or you can go to journeywithjill.net/masterclass. This is one thing I talked about at the end of the masterclass when we were talking about different strategies for your garden. And today I'm going to expand on that. We talked about the importance of scheduling your garden calendar with not just the when to plant, but also other tasks. But I didn't specifically mention which ones of those tasks can go on your calendar. We're going to talk about that today. Now, these tasks are not an exhaustive list. There are more. I actually go into more detail in Dream to Garden, but there also might be some that I don't mention that you can get the gist of what I'm referring to, and you can add other things on your calendar as you think of them. But at least these 12 can get your mind going, and think about some of these tasks that you can get on your calendar now. That way we can have an easier, more enjoyable season. Task number 1 is to put on the calendar to order or buy seeds. Now, I'm not saying to order yet. I'm not saying to buy the seeds yet, although you may have already done that. But I'm saying to put it on the calendar. And here's what I mean. You want to make sure that you have your seeds, whether you order them online or you buy them locally. You want to make sure that you have them when you need them. You want to make sure that when it's time that you can actually plant in your garden, you're not hurrying to order seeds and hope they come in on time. This is a mistake that I made last year, and I didn't get my onion seeds, which were the first seeds that I planted. I didn't get them in on time. It ended up being a nice little experiment, which I'll share later. But the point is, you don't want to be rushing around to do that. Now, notice that I said order or buy seeds, put those on your calendar, but don't actually buy them yet. The reason I say this is because I think the most efficient garden plan is done where you plan your garden first, and then you buy the seeds and you buy the plants. We'll talk about that in a minute, that you have already decided that you want to plant. Now, you can go through all the seed catalogs and plan your garden and just buy what sounds good to you, but most likely what's going to happen, because I've done it before, is you're going to buy more than you need. You don't have enough space for what you are ordering, and you're probably going to forget some things. So that's why I walk Dream to Garden students through planning your garden first, and then you're ordering your seeds. That way you're being more efficient with all of your purchases. You're placing all of your orders at the same time. It's going to save you on shipping. That way you just do it once and you don't have to go back and forth and get what you forgot or you order too many and spend too much money. You kind of get what I'm saying. But number one is to put the purchase of the seeds on your calendar. Now, don't stop with the purchase of seeds. Think outside the box because seeds are not the only things that you're going to be buying, right? For instance, maybe you're not starting onions from seed. Maybe you are going to be buying transplants. Whether you buy them online, I like to buy mine from Dixondale Farms online. You can also buy them locally. A lot of times co-ops and nurseries will have them. The point is that you want to put that on the calendar when you're going to order or when you're going to go get them locally. The same is true for seed potatoes. I order mine from Wood Prairie Family Farm. They're an organic potato farm, but if I ever buy seed potatoes locally, I still put that on the calendar. And depending on whether I'm ordering them online or I'm going to buy them locally will depend on where on the calendar any of this will go. So we've got onion transplants, seed potatoes, sweet potato slips, strawberry bare roots. This is something if you're planting strawberries, buy the bare roots and not in a cell pack like you might see at Lowe's. I like buying bare roots just because they're so much cheaper. And also I can order them online and get a better variety or better selection, I would say, with strawberry plants. You want to make sure and order those strawberry bare roots where they come in like a day or two before you plant. You really need to get those in the ground pretty quickly when they come in for the best results. And to do that, you want to time your order appropriately. This also applies to any bushes that you want to plant, any trees, any fruit trees, any asparagus crowns that you're going to order or buy. You get my point. Anything that you know you're going to need to plant, put on the calendar when you want to purchase. That brings us to number 2, which is the similar concept, and that is to put on your calendar when you need to buy local transplants. For instance, if you're not starting your tomato seeds or your pepper seeds indoors, then you're going to buy them as transplants from a local nursery or garden center. What you want to do is put on your calendar, this week I need to buy the transplants. Now, as opposed to strawberry bare roots or some of the other things that you buy, you're going to have a little bit more leeway here. When you get the transplants home, you can put them in a sunny location, make sure they stay watered, and unless they're severely root bound, you've got a few days before you need to plant. But the whole point is if you get that sunny Saturday and your average last frost date has passed and you feel like your temperatures have stabilized, it is so much easier to already have those plants ready to go compared to getting up, going to the garden center, deciding what you want, coming home, and then planting them. I've done that before, and so many people do that. I'm not saying that you can't do that. Obviously, that would be a full garden planting day, and all of that would work fine. I prefer to do it on separate days. That way, I can really focus on what I want to buy. I'm not overbuying because I see all the bright, shiny objects at the garden center. And then when it comes time to planting, I can just focus that day on planting. That's just me personally. If you want to do that, then I would recommend putting it on your calendar a day or two before you plan on planting to go out and buy these local transplants. Number 3, consider any new beds that you want to add to your garden space. If you're doing raised beds, then you may want to order them. I've been ordering mine lately from Epic Gardening. I love their Birdie's raised beds, their metal raised beds, and now they come in 3 easy sizes, small, medium, and large. You can choose between 2 different depths, the 15-inch and I think it's 30-inch, I can't remember, but I'll order those. Or if you want to build raised beds, you need to put on your calendar when you're going to go obtain the material, when you're going to build it. And again, that all can be in one day, but it's probably not the same day that you're going to fill your bed and plant. That in itself is a process. Regardless of if you order your beds or if you build them, you want to get that on your calendar so that you can have the beds ready to go when it's time to fill and when it's time to plant. That's another thing you want to make sure that you put on your calendar, or at least have it where you know you need to do it before planting time, is to fill your beds. When do you need to have your beds filled? Well, it just depends on when you're going to plant the first plants in that bed. For example, I've got I think 6 new Birdie's raised beds this year in my new kitchen garden. I'm hoping to share more about that on YouTube as we go. But as I'm thinking about, man, I've got 6 raised beds to fill, brand new. My priority is which one am I going to plant in first? And which crops are going to go in that area first. That's the one I'm going to make sure to fill first. And those are going to be cool season crops. Almost all of them are. But I think there's one particular bed that might, if I'm not mistaken, that is just going to be warm season crops I'm not going to plant until tomatoes go in. Well, that doesn't need to be filled till a month or so later. So consider when the first crop that you're going to be planting, when does that need to go in the ground? And you need to make sure that you have the beds filled by then. Now, this is assuming you're going to be building or buying new raised beds, but maybe you are going to be doing a new garden plot in your ground. If you're doing that, you have a few different options. If you're starting in the spring, it's going to be really hard to try to cover it and build on top of that. Although you can, you're going to need a whole lot of organic matter to do that. So that's something that you're going to have to get in place. If you're going to do the lasagna garden method, and you're going to be, this is what I did my first year, is I laid newspaper on the bottom and then I put compost on top, I think wood chips on the top of that. Anyway, it's been so long since I've done that. But the whole point is you're going to have materials. You're going to have to obtain the materials. Maybe you don't want to do a lasagna garden method. Maybe you want to till the space. I'm not opposed to a one-time till, even if you're a no-till gardener, till it to get it ready to go and then start piling on the mulch so you don't have to till again. Then you need to obtain the tiller, right? I mean, these are so obvious, the things that you need to do, but what you need to do is you need to think about, what is it that I'm hoping to accomplish? What's it going to look like when it's ready to plant? In this instance, a bed or a new plot. Then what needs to be done to get it ready, and what materials do I need to obtain to get it there? So you're kind of working backwards. But the whole point is that you want to get these things on your calendar, or at least you're thinking of them ahead of time, because you don't want to end up with that beautiful day where you're ready to plant and nothing has been done, and you spend your whole day preparing when you really want to plant or you need to plant. So that's kind of what I'm getting at here. I like to write things on my calendar on the week that I need things to be done. That's just the way that I do it, but you can get the gist of the importance of just thinking ahead at the very least, so you can get some of these things on your calendar and get them planned ahead of time so you're ready to go when the time is right. Task number 4 is if you're doing straw bale gardening, which we just had a podcast on that. We'll put that in the description. And I also have a YouTube playlist on my doing straw bale gardening in the past 4 years, I think. But if you're going to be doing straw bale gardening, you're going to need to obtain the supplies, and you're going to need to schedule in the conditioning process. The conditioning process of the straw bales takes about 2 weeks. I know a lot of people ask me, do you just plant in straw by itself? No, you don't plant in straw by itself. You have to add things to it over the period of a couple of weeks to basically get that straw bale composting in place, and then you plant it. It is the most, besides my green stalk vertical planters, it's the most hands-off way of gardening that I've ever done after you get done with the conditioning process. But getting it up to that point requires some planning. You need to obtain the bales, which means you need to go buy them or have them delivered. You need to buy the nitrogen source. You need to buy the all-purpose fertilizer. And then you need to schedule out the conditioning process. What you want to do with that is you want to start at least 14 days, if not a little bit more, before you plan to plant in those straw bales. If you're in Dream to Garden, we just added a few new videos here to help you plan for the straw bale garden in context of the Dream to Garden plan that I share with you in the course in Dream to Garden. So if you're a Dream to Garden student, make sure you know that you have those lessons in your portal that we just added last month. They're ready for you to take a look at. So all that to say, that needs to be planned on your calendar as well so that your straw bales are ready for you when you start planting. Number 5 is to get all of the supplies that you might need throughout the starting season. This will start with seed starting supplies. You may have already done that by this time of the year, but maybe you haven't. And if you haven't, then you need to obtain all the seed starting supplies that you'll need. That way, when it's time to start planting, you don't have to rush out and go and get them. But this could also mean other types of supplies that you might need throughout the year. I'll share with you some examples in just a minute. But the whole point is to make sure you have the supplies ready when you need them. Number 6 is to schedule on your calendar when you want to build any vertical trellises that you want to add to your garden. Vertical gardening is something that I always utilize to be able to maximize space. I talked about that in the masterclass this week. And one thing that sometimes we forget to put on our calendar is, oh yeah, I got to get these in place. Now you can actually do most of this as early as you want. If you're listening to this and it's not time to plant anything yet, you can take one of those sunny February days. We get a lot of them here in Arkansas, just depending on where you're located. You may not, but take one of those days where it's not quite time to plant and you can start building out your trellis, whether it's a wooden trellis or an arch trellis or something like that. You can start doing that early and get it out of the way. But at the very latest, you want to get it in place before your crops actually need them. I like to get my trellises established when I plant, just because whether I'm planting from seed like a bean or whether I'm planting a transplant like a tomato, they are ready to climb that trellis, or that trellis is ready whenever they need it. So at the very latest, I would recommend getting your trellises in place at the time of planting. You could wait a little bit longer if you're planting from seed and you're waiting for them to sprout. But again, I think to me, it's better to get them in place before you plant, and two, you can kind of plant around the trellis so you know that's where they're going to be. Also, along those lines, besides the trellises and this is something that I've forgotten to do in the past, and I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot, I need this particular thing. And that is stakes, cages. For tomatoes, for example, and if I'm growing them in straw bales, I'll use a cattle panel, which you'll see in the YouTube videos if you watch them. But if I'm growing Roma tomatoes, for example, I'm usually just staking them either with rebar or wooden stakes, and I need to obtain those. That's one thing that I've been so frustrated because I go to plant my tomato, or maybe my tomato needs a stake and I forgot to put it in there, and then I have to rush around and try to find that. Try to get those obtained as soon as you can. Cages, if you have large cages that you want tomatoes to grow in, I would recommend not the ones that are labeled tomato cages at the store. Those are more like pepper cages, but any large tomato cages or the quote tomato cages that you find at the store, those are good for peppers. Get those ready. That way, when you're planting your tomatoes, when you're planting your peppers, you have those cages ready. Number 6 is any big projects that you want to complete. These definitely need to be on the calendar. Like if you want to build or develop a compost bin or a compost bay area, put that on the calendar for whatever makes sense to you. That's one of those things that's kind of been on my list to do since last fall, and I still haven't done it. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get it done before summer, but it's one of those things, honestly, that you could do anytime. But whenever you want it ready, put that on there. Another thing is a fence. I know everybody wants to know what's the easiest way to keep critters out of your garden. There's all sorts of things you can do. The sprays supposedly work, but depending on your garden space, I have too big of a garden space, at least in my large garden, not in my kitchen garden, but in my large garden, I have too big of a space to go out there and spray all the time. So build a fence or get some kind of barrier for your crops. The last thing you want to do is spend all this time and effort and plant, whether it's a seed or transplant, and you come the next day and rabbits, in my case, but sometimes deer, have eaten it all. That is so disheartening. So plan the fence, or however you want to protect your garden from critters. Plan for that to be done before any transplants or before any seeds sprout. Otherwise, you could be setting yourself up for disappointment. I've been there, and it is not fun. Number 8 is to obtain any covers that you might want to use throughout the garden season. The first one you might want to make sure you have is a floating row cover. That is when you put out your first crops, whether it's a cool season crop or a warm season crop, and you might have a cold snap, or just covering them just in case as they start getting acclimated. That might be the first thing that you buy. Also, I recommend insect netting. This is also one of the first things that I put out, especially over my broccoli and my cabbage, to prevent the cabbage moth from getting into those plants. Although last year I found it wasn't as bad in the spring as it is in the fall. The point is that if you're planning on covering any of your crops with insect netting to try to prevent pests, cabbage worms is the biggest one I think most people deal with, but also pickle worm is a big deal for some people, especially in the South. We haven't had them, thankfully, but really the best way to prevent pickle worm with your cucumbers is to protect with the insect netting until the bees need to get in there to pollinate. And honestly, if you have pickle worms, side note, I would recommend looking into a parthenocarpic variety that doesn't need pollination and just keep it covered all the time. That was kind of a side tip that really didn't have anything to do with the topic, but I have people asking me about pests and pickle worms in particular quite a bit. So obtain any kind of covers that you need. And while you're at it, I know it's really hard to think about the hot summer, but getting shade cloth and having shade cloth ready to go whenever it starts getting really hot is always a good idea as well. And if you need examples of what I use for my floating row covers, insect netting, and shade cloth, I have them on my Amazon favorites list. We'll link that in the description, or you can go to journeywithjill.net/Amazon. All of those links are on there. Number 9, this is something that you want to put on your calendar in July, and that is to plan or revisit your plans for your fall garden. This may sound really strange. Why am I telling you in February to plan your fall garden? That's because most of the time our fall gardens need to be planned and some crops need to be planted. Honestly, I've seen this across the board, no matter where you live, although the further south you get, could do a little bit later. But most of us are starting to plan and plant our earliest fall garden seeds in July. Well, what's happening in our garden in July? Everything, at least in my garden, is starting to come to harvest. That's usually my biggest month of tomato canning. It is really hard in July and even into August to even think about the fall garden because we're so tired. We're so hot. It's the dog days of summer for a reason, and it is so hard to think about planning and planting your fall garden. That's why I recommend in my Dream to Garden online garden planning course, I recommend that you plan your fall garden right now. That's what I do. I plan out my entire year, including my fall garden. That way, when it comes time to plant, all I have to do is look at my calendar and I have to say, okay, this week in July, it's super busy, but I need to be able to carve out 10 minutes to plant my broccoli and my cabbage seeds. And I already have it ready to go. Now that's optional. If you can't even imagine thinking of a fall garden at this time, maybe you're a new gardener and you're just hoping to get something to grow and stay alive in the spring and summer, completely let's modify this task. Instead, put on your plan in July to revisit this. That way you know that you need to start this in July, because a lot of times beginning gardeners will think when it first starts cooling off in September, okay, now I want a fall garden. And in many cases, it's too late to start planting a lot of those crops. Not all, but it's really good to prompt yourself in July to think about planning your fall garden. And for those of you who do plan your fall gardens in February, like I do, like members of Dream to Garden who do that, also put on your calendar to revisit your fall garden plan in July. This is something I always do. I have in mind how many I want to plant and what I want to plant in my fall garden, but sometimes I adjust that based on how those same crops in the spring did. For instance, if I have carrots or beets that didn't do very well, maybe I need to up the amount that I plant in the fall, or maybe I had a bumper crop and I can reduce the amount that I plant in the fall. You can see, or maybe I realize, you know what, last spring I had way too much broccoli or cabbage and I don't need as much, then you can adjust that way as well. Or, you know what, I've never tried parsnips. Maybe I should try that. That's just an example. So the whole point is you can go back and revisit your plan. So even if you do plan your fall garden now, make a note in July to go back and revisit it and make sure that that's everything that you still want to do for the fall. Number 10, put on your calendar to order garlic. If you're planting garlic is planted in the fall for best results. You'll want to order your seed garlic in September. Now, that's totally okay if you're not planting that early. I don't plant usually till late October, early November, and you can even plant a little later than that, depending on where you're located. But I say put it on the calendar to order in September because that's usually when orders start opening with the garlic farms. And if you're not careful, you will run into supply issues. Maybe the varieties that you want to grow, they're going to be sold out. A lot of the most popular ones are. Sometimes the farmers, the crops don't go as well, so they have limited supply of certain varieties. So put that on the calendar to be looking for that to order. And even if you order it and they ship it right away, put it in a cool spot in your house, in the dark, not exposed to any light. And they will keep until you're ready to plant them. That's what they're made to do. So don't worry about needing to plant them as soon as you get them in. You don't. Just keep them in a cool spot until it's time to plant. That leads us to our next task, and that is to actually plant your garlic. Put that on your calendar too. Sometimes that's one that we kind of forget about, but you're going to want to plant your garlic around your average first frost date. And honestly, garlic is is not so particular about when to plant. You can plant a little bit sooner than that. You can plant a little bit later than that, but still it's good to put on your calendar right around your average first frost date or right around your average first frost. That's a great time to put on your calendar to plant that garlic that you ordered in September. And finally, number 12 is succession plantings. In Dream to Garden, a big emphasis is succession planting, because succession planting is how we go from that one-time summer garden to expanding our harvest from spring, summer, into fall, and even into the winter, depending on your location. But in order to do that, you need to have a plan for succession plantings. Now, I teach you exactly how to do this based on your climate in Dream to Garden, but whether you choose to do it on your own or whether you go through it in Dream to Garden, you need to understand that even if you put it on your calendar, it may flex. Be prepared for having to be flexible with some of this. For example, one year I had potatoes planted, and every year it seems like I would harvest my potatoes in June. That's when they would be ready. Well, one particular year we had a cold spring, a cold, wet spring, and I wasn't able to get my potatoes in at the same time as I had in the years past. So I had to plant them later, and I even kind of planted them earlier than I should have. And I shouldn't have, because they're not going to grow until the temperatures are right. So all that to say, they were behind. I didn't end up harvesting them till July, probably about a month later than I normally do. Well, the plants that I had planted after potatoes, I had it scheduled on my calendar, the beginning of July, plant the next succession, which in that case was squash. Well, obviously I had to wait till I harvested the potatoes, and then I put this, I pushed the squash off by a little bit, which is really not a big deal. But the point is, once those potatoes were harvested, I knew what was coming next. Even if it didn't get planted precisely the way I had it on my calendar, I had it on my calendar to do, and so I knew what was coming next. That's the key with planning your succession plantings, is not necessarily that you're going to plant them precisely when you think you will, based on all the calculations that I give you, although that's helpful for a frame of reference. But the point is to know, okay, once this comes out or once this happens, then I'm going to plant the next thing. So that's what you want to make sure to have on your calendar, is the succession plantings throughout the year. Again, that's something I teach in detail in Dream to Garden. So if you're interested in enrolling in Dream to Garden, the doors are only open for a few more days through February 13th. If you're listening to this after the doors have closed, you can still go to journeywithjill.net/Dream to Garden and be put on the wait list to be notified next time the doors are open. But all that to say, if you're watching live, check it out and see if that would be something that would be helpful for you in your garden planting. These are the 12 things that I think sometimes we miss or we forget about putting on our garden planning tasks. But as I mentioned, they're not the only ones. There are probably other ones. I know that some people do like to do specific fertilizer routines, especially for container gardens. Fertilizer is a little bit more important with container garden than it is in the ground or in a raised bed when you already have good soil. So you may want to put on your calendar to fertilize every other week. So I'm saying these 12 are where you want to start, but your garden may require you to do something else and add to that. So feel free to add to some of these. And if you know of any that I have missed, please let me know. If you're watching on YouTube, you can let me know in the comments, or when I share this on Instagram, you can reply to me, because I'm always looking for other things to put on my to-do list, right? And it also might help others not to forget something that's important. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's been helpful for you. And I do appreciate you listening to the podcast. For those of you on YouTube, you can always listen on the go. You can check out the Beginner's Garden podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, I hope that this has been helpful for you, and I wish you the best of luck in your garden planning this year.